Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Chaf Ches Amud Beis, 28b of Maseches Kiddushin. We are starting the Mishnah that is about 8 lines from the bottom of the page. The Mishnah says, Rishus HaGavoa B'Kesef, that the Gavoa means like on high, but here it refers to the Mikdash, the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, that the property of the temple, the property of the Beis HaMikdash becomes its property b'kesef, with money. So even though we learned last week when it comes to people involved in transactions, we say that mos are not konos, that cash, money does not affect a transaction. When I hand over money to you to buy something, the item does not become mine when you receive the money. It becomes mine only once I pull the item towards me. But that's not the case for Rishus Gavoa. When Hektish, when the temple gives money, whatever the Beis HaMikdash is purchasing becomes the property of the Beis HaMikdash. Rishus HaHediot b'chazaka. But for regular people, hediotos, for regular people, like we said, money does not affect the transaction. Chazaka does an act that demonstrates possession. However, another rule, the Mishnah says, Amirasa legavoa, the word of a person that something will be for Gavoa, for the Beis HaMikdash, will be consecrated for the Beis HaMikdash, Kimisirasa lehediot. That's the equivalent of giving something, handing something over to a hediot, to a regular person. Meaning a possession can be exchanged. A transaction could occur with just my word of consecration to Hektish, as opposed to a regular person. Just saying something isn't enough. You have to actually give it. It has to exchange hands to become the property of the other one. When it comes to Hektish, when it comes to consecrating something to the Beis HaMikdash, just saying something is consecrated, it's now the property of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara will elaborate on each of these points. That's just in brief how the Mishnah says it. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Keitzad Rishus HaGavoa B'Kesef. What's this case that we said that something becomes the property of Gavoa, of the temple, B'Kesef, with just money, that money affects a transaction? Says the Gemara, here's an example. Gizbar shenasang ma'os b'behema. The Gizbar, the treasurer of the Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash collects money from everyone, and then they use that money to buy animals for the offerings, for the karbanos, in particular for the karban sibur, for the public offerings. So they have to buy they have to buy animals from a farmer. So the Gizbar, the treasurer, gives money to a farmer. So afilu behema b'sofa olam kana. Even if that animal is on the other side of the world, still, kana, the acquisition takes effect. The ma'os are konos. So the treasurer pays for the animal. Wherever that animal is, it now becomes the property of the Beis HaMikdash. Uvehediot lo kana, but when it comes to a regular person, lo kana, the money is not konet, ad sheyimshoch, until he actually pulls it, does mashicha, shows his possession of it. So that's the difference. Ma'os is konos. Money actually affects the transaction when it comes to the property of Hektish, of the temple, but not when it comes to a person. A person doesn't acquire something until he actually pulls it. So, fine. So that's that. Says the Gemara, Keitzad amirasal gavok misirasal lahediot. What about the next part of the Mishnah? The Mishnah said that the statement of a person that something is for gavoa, something's for the temple, the consecration of an item, is the equivalent of handing it over to a regular person. That it actually exchanges domains, it becomes the property of Hektish by just dedicating it, consecrating it. So how does that work? The Gemara asks. It says, Omer shor zeh ola. If a person says, this ox will be a karban ola, an elevation offering, or bayis zeh Hektish, or this house should belong to Hektish, should belong to the Beis HaMikdash, afilu b'sofa olam, even if it's on the other side of the world, it doesn't have to actually be where the person who owns it is making the statement. Kana, the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, acquires it. It's now the property of the temple. But behediot, but for a regular person, lo kana, he does not acquire ad sheyimshoch, until he either pulls it, if it's an ox, movable object, v'yachzik, or does a chazaka, if it's a piece of property. So, but he has to actually make a kinyan. So when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, I say, I dedicate this to you, to the Beis HaMikdash, it now belongs to the Beis HaMikdash. When it comes to regular property, it's not until the acquirer makes a kinyan, makes an act that demonstrates ownership, that it becomes his. Now the Gemara gives a couple of examples. Mashcho b'mana, let's say a person is buying something from Hektish. So he's buying something from the treasurer, redeeming it. He's redeeming something, that's the word we use to redeem something. So somebody donated a motorcycle to the Beis HaMikdash, but the Beis HaMikdash doesn't need a motorcycle. So somebody has to buy it off the Beis HaMikdash to redeem it. So if he pulls it, and at the time that he pulls it towards himself, it was worth a mana. It was worth a mana, 100 zuz. But he didn't pay for it yet. He didn't pay the money. But he wasn't able to actually pay the money to redeem it until the markets went up, and now it's worth 200. Instead of 100, it's worth 200. So, how much does he have to pay? Do we say that since he did the Mashicha, he took possession of the item when it was only worth 100, he only owes 100? Or do we say that he still owes the 200? Or since it went up before he paid, he has to pay the full amount, the current amount, which is 200. So the Gemara says, no saying Masayim. He has to pay 200. We don't base it on the time that he pulled the item from Hektish. We base it on the time of payment. My taima, what's the reason? Because the pasuk says, V'nasa nakesef v'kamala. It says that he'll give the money and it will be established for him, meaning you only possess it from Hektish when you actually pay for it. As opposed to when you buy something from a person, you can buy on credit. If you would pull something, you're buying an ox. So you pull the ox towards you, you haven't yet paid. So now it's yours. Once you've agreed that should happen, it's yours and you'll pay later. And if it goes up in value, well, you just pay for however much it was worth at the time that you pull it towards you. However, when it comes to Hektish, when it comes to property of the temple, the pasuk says, and he shall give money and it will belong to him. So it doesn't belong to him until he actually pays the money. So if he pulled it when it was worth 100, that didn't do anything. Until he actually pays for it, it's not his. So if it went up in value before he paid for it, before he redeemed it, then he has to pay the higher value. What if it was the opposite though? Mashcho b'masayim. Let's say when he pulled it towards him, it was worth 200. But he wasn't able to redeem it until it went down to a mana to 100. So if a person buys something, he's buying an item from another person. So if at the time that he pulled it towards him it was worth 200, and then by the time it was time to pay, it went down in value, he still has to pay 200. He possessed it when he pulled it towards him. Now it's his, and he owes whatever the amount that they agreed upon, which was 200. The fact that it goes down to 100, it shouldn't make a difference. That's when you're buying from a regular person. Now, you would think that it should be the same. So when it comes to Hektish, though, you would think it should be different. Why? Because we just learned that when it comes to Hektish, it doesn't become yours until you actually pay for it. So if I pull it when it's worth 200, is it mine yet? It's not mine yet, because I didn't pay for it yet. I didn't redeem it yet. So if it goes down to 100, I should only have to redeem it for 100. Because it's only once I give the money that it becomes mine. I haven't given the money, it's not mine, and now it's worth 100, so I should redeem it for 100. That's what one would think. Says the Gemara, no. No saying Masayim, you still have to pay 200. So you pulled it from Hektish when it was worth 200, but it went down to 100, and now you're going to actually redeem it. How much do you have to redeem it for? 200. My taima, what's the reason? Says the Gemara, Lo yehe koach hedyot chamor mehektish. Because the power of a hedyot, of a regular individual, should not be stronger than hektish. Meaning, in this scenario, a seller of a normal individual, just a regular person, would make out better than hektish would in this scenario, right? Like we said, it would seem that if Reuven is buying an ox from Shimon, he pulls it towards him. It's worth 200 right now, and he pulls it towards him. Then he's going to owe 200. It doesn't matter if it goes down in value. He's going to owe 200. So hektish shouldn't be worse off than that when they're selling an ox, when somebody's redeeming an ox. So even though it would somewhat make sense, like we said, since you don't actually possess it until you pay the money, and therefore if it went down in value before you possessed it, you should only owe the lower value to hektish. But the Gemara says, no, hektish can't be worse off than a regular person, since a regular person in this scenario would get 200 for it, so hektish is going to get 200 also. What about, says the Gemara, Pado b'masayim, v'lo hispik l'moshcho ad she'amad b'manim. A guy, let's say, instead of pulling it towards him before he paid for it, he did the opposite. He redeemed it for money, and then he's going to pay it towards him. So he goes to the Beis HaMikdash, to the treasurer. He pays him 200 for the ox, or whatever item is he's redeeming. He pays him 200, and by the time, though, he actually has a chance to pull the ox towards him, it goes down to 100. So what happens? Does he get his money back? Does he get 100 back, or the treasurer, the Beis HaMikdash, keeps the 200? Says the Gemara, no saying Masayim. He gives the 200, meaning they keep the 200. My time, what's the reason? Because the pasuk says he'll give the money and it will be his. So it doesn't matter when he pulls it towards him. He bought it for 200, he redeemed it for 200, at that moment it became his, wherever it is, and that's it. The fact that it goes down later, it doesn't make a difference. He already paid for it. He already made it his. What about Pado b'maneh v'lo hispik l'moshcho ad she'amad b'masayim? What if he redeemed it for 100, and then, before he had a chance to pull it, it went up to 200? So does he have to pay the extra 100 or not? So here the Gemara says, Mashe pada padoi. What's done is done. What's redeemed is redeemed. Ve'ein nosing al mano. He only has to pay that original 100. He doesn't have to pay another 100. So, which makes sense, right? Because it says v'nasang hakesef v'kamo. He pays and it's his. So when he paid, it was 100, and he paid for it, so it's his. So the fact that it went up to 200 shouldn't make a difference. But ask the Gemara, Amai, why is that? Hachanami, here too, Nemo, we should say, Lo yehe koach hedyot chamor mehektish. That the power of an individual shouldn't be greater than the power of hektish. And what would happen in this scenario if it was an individual? So if Reuven is buying an animal from Shimon, and at the time that Reuven buys it, it's worth 100, meaning Reuven pays 100, but he doesn't have a chance to possess it yet. So how much does he... and then it goes up to 200. So what's the deal? Does he have to pay the extra 100? So the Gemara says he should have to, right? Because when you pay money, when it comes to individuals, it doesn't affect the transaction. Moas are not konos. So you pay the 100 for the animal, but if you didn't pull it towards him, the animal's not his yet. So if it now goes up to 200, he should owe the other 100. So it would seem by a regular person that he would have to pay 200 in this scenario. We're saying that for hektish, he only has to pay 100. But what happened to our svara, our logic, our idea that an individual can't be stronger than hektish? And if a regular seller in this case, would get 200, then hektish should get 200. So the Gemara says, it's not so simple. Atu hedyot lab b'misha parakai. Wouldn't a regular individual also, in this case, be subject to mishapara. Mishapara is the beginning words of a curse. Mishapara, the one, it's, God who repaid the generation of the flood should repay this person in kind, something along those lines. It's a curse that the sages give to someone who backs out of a deal. If somebody agreed to sell something and then received the money and then backed out, because Mos are not Konos, because, at the end of the day, I could just give you back your money. So there's a Mishapara, there's different, probably other cases also, but where somebody goes back on their word in a deal, they get the curse of Mishapara. So therefore, says the Gemara, even a Hedyot, even an individual in this case, actually, technically speaking, he could get 200, but that would subject him to this curse of Mishapara. So really, he's normally only going to still get 100. Meaning, again, if Reuven buys something from Shimon, and he pays 100, but he doesn't yet pull it towards him, and then it goes up in value to 200, so it's not yet his yet. So Shimon, the seller, can say, you should pay me 200. But since Shimon originally agreed to sell it to him for 100, and accepted the payment, then that's not, that's wrong for him to now say, actually, it went up, you have to pay me 200. He already agreed to this. So he would get the curse of Mishapara. So under normal circumstances, he's not going to get the 200, he's going to get the 100. So therefore, we don't apply the logic and say, if a Hedyot, if a regular person has the power to get 200, Hektish should get the power to get 200. Because a regular person doesn't really have the power to get 200. If he wants to subject himself to a curse, he could. But really, in this case, even a regular seller would get the 100 that was originally paid for it. And so to Hektish, when a person redeems, at the time that they redeem it, it becomes theirs. So if at the time that he redeemed it was worth 100, even if before it went up to 200 before he actually pulled it towards himself, but it's already his once he paid the 100, and there's no reason to say that he has to pay 200, and there's no logic here that says, but a regular person will get 200, because a regular seller will not get 200 in this case, unless he wanted to subject himself to the curse of Mishapara, which is definitely not recommended. Okay, so now we're starting a new sugya, a new topic. The Mishnah is now moving on to the subject of mitzvos. There's different understandings of what the connection exactly is over here. I think some understand that, we talked about marriage, Kiddushin, so now we're going to talk about sort of the responsibilities of the husband and the wife to their children. I think there's other ways to understand the connection, but we get into now a very important Mishnah about the obligations that people have in terms of mitzvos. So the Mishnah says, Kol mitzvos habein al ha'av, any mitzvah for now we'll say, of a son with regard to the father. The Gemara will explain what it is, what we're talking about. But mitzvahs of the son, which are upon the father, anashim chayavin v'nashim p'turos. Men are obligated in, and women are exempt. So mitzvahs of the son that are on the father's obligated and the mother's not. The women are exempt. V'chol mitzvahs ha'av ala ben, and mitzvahs of the father that are on the son, echad anashim v'echad nashim chayavin. Both men and women are obligated in the mitzvahs that relate to the father. Again, the Gemara will explain what that is referring to. It's referring to, I'll just tell you now, kibbud abayim, honoring parents. That both the men and the women are obligated to honor their parents. V'chol mitzvos aseh shazman grama, and all mitzvos that are impacted by time, that are time bound, anashim chayavin. This is pasuk of mitzvos. Pasuk of mitzvos that are time bound, men are obligated in. V'nashim peturos, and women are exempt from. So, like singing in the sukkah, it's a time-bound mitzvah, so men are obligated, women are exempt. V'chol mitzvos aseh shelo hazman grama, and pasuk of mitzvos that are not time-bound, echad hanashim v'echad hanashim chayavin. Both men and women are obligated in mitzvahs that are not time-bound. V'kol mitzvos lo saseh, and when it comes to negative commandments, prohibitions, bein shazman grama, bein shelo hazman grama, whether it is time-bound, whether it is not time-bound, echad hanashim ve'echad hanashim chayavin. Both men and women are obligated in all of the negative commandments, prohibitions. Chutz, except for Baal Takif. Do not square off your sideburns, the sides of your head. Ubal Tashtis, and don't destroy your beard. Don't uproot the roots of your beard. Uval Titame Lamesim, and that Kohanim are not allowed to become Tame, not allowed to become impure by coming into contact with the dead, at least outside their immediate family. So that's only the male Kohanim have that prohibition, and women from Kohanic families don't have that prohibition. So women have all the prohibitions that men have except for 3. Prohibition of squaring off the corners of your hair, uprooting one's beard, and not becoming Tameh for a Kohen from the dead. Okay, so the Gemara now examines the beginning of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Kol mitzvos haben al ha'av, all mitzvos of the son that are on the father, nashim chayov and nashim turos. Men are obligated and women are exempt. Ask the Gemara, my mitzvos haben al ha'av. What does this mean? The mitzvos of the son that are on the father. Ilema kol mitzvos demechayev bra lemevod la'aba. If you think it means, if you would tell me that it means the mitzvos that a son is obligated to perform for the father, like honoring parents and fearing parents, that's not what the beginning of the Mishnah is referring to. Why? Nashim peturos, are women exempt? The first clause of the Mishnah says men are obligated, women are exempt. So it can't be talking about honoring parents, caring for your parents. Says the Gemara, are women exempt from that? Vehatanya, we're learning a brisa. It says in the pasuk, Ish, a man. It says, Ish imo ve'aviv tirav. A man should fear his mother and his father. Ein li ala ish. I only know that a man is obligated because it says a man. Isha minayim. How do I know even a woman is obligated in this? Kishu omer ish imo ve'aviv tira'u. Harekan shnayim. When it says a man, his mother and his father, they shall fear. In the plural, they, not the they is not going on. I mean, the end. There's u, which is plural, meaning the mother and father. But the tira'u, actually, that's not even true. Tira'u means they, meaning the people doing the fearing. So it starts off with ish, a man, in singular, and it says tira'u, they should fear. Who's the they? Says the Gemara, that's 2. That means men and women are both obligated in fearing their parents as well as honoring their parents. So that can't be what the Mishnah was talking about when it said the mitzvahs of the son on the father, only men are obligated and not women. That can't be honoring parents because women are obligated to honor their parents. So what is it referring to? Amar Rav Yehuda says, Hachi Kamer. This is what it's saying. Kol mitzvos haben hamutalos al ha'av la'asos livno. All the mitzvos of the son that are upon the father to do for the son, anashim chayavin v'nashim peturos. Men are obligated and women are exempt. So there are mitzvos that a father has to ensure that his son does or has done to him. Man is obligated in those mitzvos. A mother is not obligated in those mitzvos. She does not have to make sure that her son has these things. So what are these things? So Tanina Lahadatana Rabban, we learn the following brisa. Ha'av chayev bivino, a father is obligated with regards to his son, lamulo, to give him a bris milah, to circumcise him, vilifdoso, and if he is a firstborn, to redeem him. There's a mitzvah to redeem the firstborns. Ulilamdo Torah, and to teach him Torah. Ulahasio isha, and to help him get married to a woman. Ulilamdo umnas, and to teach him a trade. V'yesh omrim af la'ashita b'mayim, and some say he also has to teach his son how to swim. So certainly some of these are mitzvos that a son has, or that there's a mitzvah for the son to have. So bris milah, redeeming the firstborn, learning Torah, getting married. So all these things, a father has responsibility to ensure that they happen to his son. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol she'ena melamed es beno umnus, melamdo listus. If you don't teach your son a trade, you are teaching him to be a bandit, to rob. Listos al kadaitach, you're teaching him to be a robber. You think that's what you're teaching him? No, elo ki'ilu melamdo listos. It's as if you're teaching him listos, to be a bandit. Because if he doesn't have a way of earning money, then he may end up just robbing people. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. So, but what we have here is that there are certain mitzvos that have to be performed by a son or to a son, and the father is responsible to make sure that those happen. It's a father's responsibility, not a mother's responsibility. Says the Gemara, Ramulo minola. How do we know that a father is obligated to give his son a bris milah, a circumcision? Tichsev, because the pasuk says, Vayamal Abraham es Yitzchak beno. And Abraham gave Yitzchak his son a bris. So you see, the father is the one that's responsible to make sure that the son has a bris. Ve'echa delo mahalei avua. And if the father doesn't, mechayvi beidina lemimale, then the beis din is obligated to give him a bris. Tichsev, because the pasuk says, Himol lachem kol zachar. You should, the pasuk says, this is my covenant that you should keep. Himol lachem kol zachar. You all should circumcise all males. Which is teaching us that if the father is not going to do it, or there is no father, then it becomes the responsibility of the beis din, of the court, really, of the community, to ensure that the boy gets a bris. Vehecha delo mahale beidina, and if the beis din didn't give the bris for the child, mechayev ihu lemimel nafshe, then when he's older, he is responsible to give himself a bris, to make sure he gets a bris. Tichsev, as the pasuk says, ve'arel zachar asher lo imoes b'sar laso, a uncircumcised male who does not give himself a circumcision, v'nichrisa, he will be cut off, he'll get karis. So it's the very severe punishment for someone who doesn't have a bris milah. If nobody did it for him, he has to make sure it happens for himself. Ihi minolan delo mechayva. And how do we know that the mother is not responsible, does not have a chiyuv, at least her own chiyuv? It may be that she may be included in the community chiyuv, but she doesn't have an obligation as a mother. A father has an obligation as a father. If he won't do it, then the community is obligated. The mother doesn't have a specific obligation. Again, she might be included in that community obligation, but she doesn't have, as a parent, the obligation to give her son a bris. How do we know? How do we know? Tichsev, because the pasuk says, with regards to Avram, it says, Kasher tziva oso Elokim, as Hashem commanded him. Oso velo osa. You see, the commandment was to him and not to her, not to Sarah. It was only to Abraham. Says the Gemara, Ashkecham miyad. So we find that at that moment, Avram was commanded. But Lidaros Minola, how do we know that that's true for future generations? It says, Hashem commanded Avraham. Okay, so Avram was commanded and not Sarah. But maybe in future generations, it's a command not just on the father, but also on the mother. So Tara de Rabbi Shmuel, so they taught in the base medrash of Rabbi Shmuel, Kol makom shneimar tzav, whenever we see this language of tzav, of a command, here it says, Kasher tziva oso Elokim, as Hashem commanding him. Whenever we see the language of tzav, Eino ela zirus miyad uledaros. It's a instruction for right now and for future generations. How do we know this? Tichsiv, we find it in the context of Yoshua. It says, V'tzavas Yoshua v'chazkeu v'amtzeu. It says, command Yoshua and strengthen him. This Moshe Rabbeinu is told, command Yoshua to lead and strengthen him. That's miyad. That's for right now. Uledaros, and we know that it's for future generations, Tichsiv, because then it says, Min hayom asher tziva Hashem v'halo ledarosechem. So that's the zirus miyad. I think what we see from Yoshua is chazkeu v'amtzeu, command him and strengthen him. Be mazaris him, encourage him, instruct him. But how do we know it's for all generations? So that's from another pasuk. The pasuk says, Min hayom asher tziva Hashem v'hala ledarosechem. From the day that Hashem commanded Moshe and onwards for all future generations. So tziva, we see, extends l'doros, for future generations. So that's, the Gemara says, therefore we understand that when it says kasher tziva osa Elokim, like Hashem commanded Abraham, it's not just for this moment, it's a zeros, it's an instruction to act with zrizos, with zeal, alacrity for this moment, but also for future generations there will be the same construct of the mitzvah. So the mitzvah of milah is specifically on the father and not on the mother. Again, if there's no father, he doesn't do it, then it falls to the community, and it's possible that the mother is part of that obligation, but she doesn't have her own obligation as a mother. Okay, now we also mentioned in this brisa liftoso, that the father is obligated to redeem his firstborn son. Minalan, how do we know that? Dichsiv, because the pasuk says, Kol bechor banecha tifteh. All the firstborns of your sons, of your children, you should redeem. So, very explicit, he has to redeem his firstborn. That's at least how we know that there's a general obligation on the father. It doesn't exclude the mother yet, but there's an obligation on the father to redeem. And if the father did not, then he himself has to redeem himself. If a person grows up as the firstborn, they were never redeemed, they have to find a Kohen and pay the Kohen, give him 5 shekel to redeem himself. That's real shekels, not Israeli shekels. So he is responsible to redeem himself. Dichsiv, how do we know that an individual has to? Because it says, Pado sifteh. The pasuk says, any firstborns of the womb, whether for man or for animals, ach pado siftes bechor ha'adam. It says you should redeem the bechor ha'adam. It's meant to be dedicated for Hashem, so you redeem it instead. You redeem it instead. And it says pado sifteh. You shall surely redeem. So, who is that talking to? So, it's also talking to the individual, and the way that Rashi seems to explain it is we read it as tipadeh. He should redeem himself. That he has to redeem himself if he wasn't yet redeemed. Now, how do we know, says the Gemara, V'ihi minalan delo mechayvel lemifrak nafsha? How do we know that a woman is not obligated to redeem herself? That only a male bechor, not a female. Dichsiv, as it says, tipadeh, tifteh, tipadeh. Again, we take this language, it's tifteh, you should be redeemed, you should redeem. And tipadeh, you should redeem yourself. We see the words tipadeh and the word sifteh. You should redeem, you should make sure to be redeemed. And we see from that a connection between redeeming others and redeeming oneself. Anybody who other people are obligated to redeem, has to redeem themselves if they weren't redeemed. And anyone that others are not obligated to redeem, does not have to redeem himself. And how do we know that others are not responsible? Sorry, I think I skipped. Let me go back. Yeah, let's go back. I'm sorry, I skipped a little bit. So I skipped the ihi minalan delo mifkada. How do we know that the mother? I'm 8 lines from the bottom of the page. First word on the line. The ihi minalan delo mifkada. How do we know that the mother doesn't have to redeem her firstborn? Dichsiv, because it says tifteh tipadeh. So the same thing that I was just mentioning, just to mention it earlier already. Tifteh tipadeh. It says pado sifteh, you shall surely redeem. The word sifteh we can also read as tipadeh. You should redeem yourself. So kol shemitzuva liftos es atzmo. If one is obligated to redeem themselves, should they not have been redeemed when they were younger, mitzuva liftos es acherim, has to redeem others. But kol she'ena mitzuva liftos es atzmo, anybody who is not responsible to redeem themselves, ena mitzuva liftos acherim, does not have to redeem others. So since a mother would not have to redeem herself if she grew up without being redeemed, and she was a firstborn, she still wouldn't have to redeem herself. So therefore, she doesn't have to redeem her son, she doesn't have to redeem others. Pado siftet, or tiftet tipadeh. Only one who has to redeem themselves has to redeem others. Now, how do we know that she doesn't have to redeem herself? Tifsiv, same thing. Tiftet tipadeh. You redeem others and you redeem yourself. Kol she'acher mitzvah liftoso. Anybody that others would have to redeem you, mitzvah liftos is atzmo. You would have to redeem yourself. Tiftet, tipadeh. If others have to redeem you, then you have to redeem yourself if they don't. But kol she'en acher mitzvah liftoso, but anyone who others would not have to redeem, ein mitzvah liftos is atzmo, does not have to redeem themselves. So therefore, a woman would not have to redeem herself because nobody would have to have redeemed her. How do we know that others do not have to redeem her? That you don't have to redeem a firstborn woman, girl, only a firstborn boy? To Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, Kol bechor banecha tifteh. You shall redeem all your firstborn sons. Banecha v'lo benosecha. Your sons and not your daughters. So really, we can now work backwards from that and say, we learn from here that you only redeem the sons and not the daughters. And only somebody who has to redeem, who others have to redeem, has to redeem themselves. So only a son has to be redeemed. So only a son has to redeem himself, not a daughter. And only somebody who has to redeem themselves has to redeem others. So only a son or a male would have to redeem his firstborn. But a woman, since she would not have to redeem herself, she would not have to redeem her firstborn. That's how we know that a woman is not obligated to redeem her firstborn. It's only a mitzvah on the father. Okay, next week we'll continue the topic of redeeming firstborns and other mitzvahs of the father versus the mother.